Thanks for being with us here on the Journal.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. We give you thanks, O God, for giving us another day. Please help us to use it well. We ask your blessing upon this assembly and upon all to whom the authority of government is given. Help them to meet their responsibilities during these days, to attend to the immediate needs and concerns of the moment, all the while enlightened by the majesty of your creation and your eternal Spirit. We give you thanks that we all can know and share the fruits of your Spirit, especially in this time, the virtue of tolerance and reconciliation, of justice and righteousness, of goodwill and understanding, of patience and loving care for others. Watch over this house and cause your blessing to be upon each member, that they might serve all the people with sincerity and truth. May all that is done within the people's house this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the Journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof, and pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. Pledge of allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise? Without objection. So ordered. Mr. Warren.
Mr. Speaker, Congress faces looming deadlines at the end of this year set to take effect in the first days of 2013. Just as we ring in a new year with a renewed sense of optimism, if Congress does not act, looming defense cuts will cripple our military and this nation. Our military will be forced to cut an additional 10% from its budgets, an additional 10% of resources supporting our troops deployed overseas, fighting for our freedoms, an additional 10% of budgets supporting new technologies, training and ships already lacking maintenance and behind schedule, and an additional 10% of our national security. While the House passed and I proudly supported legislation in May to avert these cuts, action is still needed by the Senate and the administration. Why does Congress continue to wait? Why does Congress procrastinate on an issue so pressing and so important to this nation? Who will answer the call? Leaving this issue to the last minute is irresponsible, and failure is not an option. I urge the leaders of this nation to stop the delay. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1972, Palestinian terrorists broke into the Israeli Olympic compound and murdered in cold blood 11 Israeli athletes. In the 40 years since, shamefully, the International Olympic Committee has refused to have a minute of silence to commemorate these 11 martyrs. They have rejected it time and time again, and tomorrow the Olympic Games are starting in London, and they've rejected it again, shamefully. So I will use the rest of my 1 minute to do a moment of silence for the 11 Israeli athletes who lost their lives at the 1972 Olympic Games. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Nevada seek recognition? Without objection. Gentleman from Nevada is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, 71 years ago today, President Roosevelt inducted over 40,000 Filipino troops into the United States Army to counter the Japanese threat. Following the occupation of the Philippines, thousands more Filipinos would join the resistance as recognized guerrilla forces working in cooperation with the U.S. Army. However, due to the Rescissions Act of 1946, the service and sacrifice of these brave Filipino veterans would go unrecognized by the U.S. government for the next 63 years. Congress finally acknowledged the dedicated service of these veterans when it established the Filipino Veterans Equity Compensation Fund in 2009. Although meager in comparison to the benefits these veterans earned, this compensation fund provided the recognition they deserved. Yet today, bureaucratic roadblocks continue to prevent nearly 4,000 of these aging World War II veterans from collecting the benefits they are due. 5 of these gentlemen, pictured here, reside in my district. They range in age from 83 to 100 years old. Regrettably, 2 others recently passed away. Many more will pass without ever obtaining the recognition they deserve if this body does not act to remove the barriers preventing these veterans from receiving the benefits they have earned. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to join me in fighting to ensure these honorable World War II veterans are appropriately recognized. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition? Without objection. Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I use my time to observe a minute of silence for the Munich 11 who lost their lives at the 1972 Olympic Games. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, take a look at this. Take a look at the regulatory red tape that's strangling America's small businesses, our job creators. Every time I travel up and down the Ohio River, businesses, both large and small, tell me that new regulations and the threat of more are keeping them from hiring and expanding. Unemployment has been above 8% for the past 41 months, and America's job creators are speaking loud and clear that they want certainty. They want to grow and expand, and as a small business owner myself, I know firsthand the destructive burden of excessive regulation. Today, this House will take an important step toward freeing America's job creators from these excessive regulations. The Red Tape Reduction in Small Business Job Creation Act puts a stop to President Obama's unchecked power to issue costly and job-killing regulations at a whim. I encourage my colleagues to stand with me in supporting this legislation that will empower job creators to put America back to work, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize George Kitchens, Jr. from Augusta, Georgia, who will be representing our state and our nation at the London Olympic Games beginning tomorrow. George will be making his very first Olympic appearance in the men's long jump. A former Clemson Tiger All-American athlete, George will be the first member of the Tigers long jump team to advance to the Olympic Games. The American Olympic team is made up of 530 men and women. For the first time in history, this Olympic team will feature more female athletes than male athletes. Of the 302 medal events at the Olympic Games, the United States will be represented at 246. We look forward to watching George win the gold when the men's long jump team takes the spotlight on Friday, August 3rd. I know I speak for all of my colleagues in wishing our American Olympic team the best of luck in London. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent? Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent? Yes. Yes. The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to express my concern that Alexander Lukashenko, President of Belarus, continues to rule over Europe's last dictatorship. Despite continuing promises of reform, Lukashenko continues to deny the people of Belarus their basic freedoms and human rights, and runs the country as an authoritative dictatorship. In fact, after Mr. Lukashenko's fraudulent election in 2010, 700 political opponents and activists were arrested during demonstrations. This is just one example of the type of persecution the people of Belarus have been subjected to in these past 18 years. Lukashenko's total disregard for the people he swore to protect is appalling, alarming, should not be tolerated. I am here today to draw attention to this matter and publicly condemn Lukashenko and his regime for their continuing oppression of the people of Belarus and offer my support for the country's civilians and democratic forces. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition? Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today with a very simple message from rural America. We need a farm bill, and we need it now. With the current farm bill set to expire at the end of September, it's crucial that we continue to provide certainty to one of the few bright spots in our economy over the past decade. It's all the more crucial to our farmers that we do this as they're staring at cracked, dried-out soil resulting from one of the worst droughts in modern history. The newspaper Politico looked back 50 years, longer than I've been alive, and found that never before has a farm bill been this close to being passed and been blocked by House leadership. This is absolutely unacceptable. Southern Minnesotans can't afford to deal with the uncertainty that follows out-of-date policy extensions or lame duck sessions. Lame for sure. Don't kick the can down the road. The Senate has passed a bill. The 2012 Farm Bill passed out of committee on July 12th with a bipartisan vote of 35 to 11, saving $36 billion for the taxpayers. My farmers in southern Minnesota are up before dawn, working till after dark. We are leaving at noon today. We have 17 days between now and November 6th to work here in Washington. That is so unacceptable, no one will agree to that. Pass the Farm Bill, pass it now.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the draft of the UN Arms Trade Treaty, called ATT, is an attempt by third world countries to control guns worldwide, including those personal firearms in the United States. Under the section of scope, the treaty indicates that the covered items include small arms and light weapons. The language is so broad that nations are expected to track all weapons movements from the time they are manufactured until their destruction. The language is vague so that the treaty could be interpreted to restrict the ability of the U.S. to help arm its allies, like Taiwan and Israel. The treaty presents a clear and present danger to the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. It allows the UN to steal our liberty. It is unbelievable that this administration is even considering signing this document. The Senate should never approve it if the President does sign on to it. The President should ignore the treaty, because he took an oath to the U.S. Constitution, not to the UN Charter. And that's just the way it is.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection, gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today the House will vote on legislation to block all new federal regulations. I'm concerned that this bill would damage our ability to improve aviation safety, which the bipartisan Western New York delegation has long promoted. We fought alongside the families of Flight 3407 who lost loved ones in a preventable air crash near Buffalo. Due to their passion and dedication, Congress passed historic aviation safety reforms 2 years ago. But this bill would prevent many of those reforms from becoming reality. Our colleague, Kathy Hochul, attempted to offer an amendment to protect these reforms from this moratorium. Inexplicably, the Rules Committee blocked her amendment. These reforms had the support of both parties, but now partisan politics is getting in the way of life-saving regulations. I urge the defeat of this anti-safety legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to the order of the House on July 25, 2012, I call up House Concurrent Resolution 134 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 134, concurrent resolution condemning in the strongest possible terms the heinous atrocities that occurred in Aurora, Colorado.
Pursuant to the order of the House of Wednesday, July 25, 2012, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, and the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, each will control 15 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We can never explain nor fully comprehend evil, but last Friday we were reminded of its existence. The face of evil emerged when a cold-blooded, calculating mass murderer trapped unsuspecting movie patrons packed in a darkened theater in my hometown of Aurora, Colorado. Today, on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, we pause to again remember the victims of this horrendous crime and to honor the courage of so many who put their own lives at risk to limit the carnage. The victims who lost their lives in the early morning hours of last Friday are Veronica Moser, age 6, Alex Tevis, age 24, Jessica Gawi, age 24, Alex Sullivan, age 27, Matt McQuinn, age 27, Michaela Medic, age 23, John Larimer, age 27, A.J. Boyk, age 18, Rebecca Wingo, age 32, John Blunk, age 26, Jessica Childress, age 29, Gordon Cowden, age 51. Aurora is a proud suburban community, mostly of working-class and middle-class families who share basic American values, the values of hard work and of faith in God and of family. My family came to Aurora, Colorado in 1964 when my father, a career soldier, was sent to Fitzsimmons Army Medical Center for his last assignment in the U.S. Army. Back then, Aurora was just a small town surrounded by 3 military bases. In the 1970s, Aurora transitioned away from being a military town, although it still has an Air Force base. Aurora has grown to become the 3rd largest city in the state of Colorado, with a population of over 300,000 residents. Aurora has also grown to become the most racially and ethnically diverse city in the state of Colorado. Aurora has received the All-American City Award by the National League of Cities in recognition of being a community whose citizens work together to identify and tackle community-wide challenges and for having achieved uncommon results. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a meeting with the Aurora Board of Realtors where Mayor Steve Hogan was speaking. He proudly informed the audience that Aurora was recently ranked as the 8th safest city of its size in the country. No doubt, we are still in shock and trying to understand why this happened to our community. The theater where so many lost their lives and where so many were injured lies in the heart of our city. The vacant ground beside the theater has been designated by our city's planners to be the future site of the city's center. Aurora will never be the same after this horrific act of evil that occurred last week. But the citizens of Aurora are caring and resilient, and the long process of healing has already begun. We will stand together and come back stronger than before this attack. When I think of all the victims of this tragedy and how much our community has suffered, I'm reminded by a refrain from a hymn that I've often sung in church. And he will raise you up on eagle's wings, bear you on the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun, and hold you in the palm of his hand. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity the other day for us to have a moment of silence. I know it was important to the members of our delegation as well as to the people of our community in Aurora, Colorado, and the whole metropolitan area. And I had a chance to speak on Tuesday. I have a number of things to say, but I know each of us in our delegation bears a heavy heart as a result of all this, and I would like others to be able to share some of their thoughts. And so with that, I yield 2 minutes to my friend from Boulder, Mr. Polis.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, and I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Perlmutter from Colorado, not only for bringing forward this resolution, but for spending time with those affected in the aftermath of this. I'd also like to thank President Obama for immediately changing his plans and coming to Colorado to express on behalf of our nation grief and provide what comfort he could to the victims and their families. I think one thing that's important for Americans to understand is Aurora is a community just like yours. My district is several miles from Aurora, but I've been to movies myself in Aurora, drive through it frequently on the way to the airport. This could be anywhere. It's a safe community. It's a community of loving families. It's a growing city. And the tragedy that occurred could have been at any one of our neighborhood theaters. Going to the movie theater, an expression of innocent joy, something that people have grown up with for generations, the magic of the silver screen, and lives torn apart. Not only those who lost their lives tragically, not only those who were injured, some of whom remain in the hospital, but all the others that were terrified, scared, in the other theaters, in the other movie theaters that night, in the community at large. This was, in many ways, a crime against innocence and a crime against enjoyment and diversion. People turned to movies, turned to entertainment for a moment's respite, a moment's entertainment from their daily lives. And this tragic end really represents an end of innocence for so many people that were affected. But so too we've seen many great heroes rise to the occasion, the courageous responders, the community of Aurora, Mayor Hogan, the families of those affected, our criminal justice system. We all come together in difficult times. We all come together, and together, with the love and respect and support from American families across the country, the victims' families know that they're not alone, and that's important, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton, is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I think that we all struggle to be able to find the words, to be able to address a flashpoint in time in the city of Aurora, to where we saw the absolute worst of humanity and senseless slaughter of innocent people, but we also saw the best of humanity. As people rose to be able to protect their loved ones, as we saw emergency service personnel rush to the scene to be able to offer aid, in the hospitals where doctors and nurses fought valiantly to be able to preserve life. As we look back on that day, we can't help but be reminded that too many lives were cut short. Chapters that were yet to be written, and needlessly and mindlessly were cut off. The hearts of all Coloradoans, and in fact what we've seen demonstrated on this floor, I think speaks to the heart of this country. As people rose as one to be able to express their empathy and their concern. We saw neighbors and strangers reaching out helping hands, all praying for that opportunity and the ability to be able to find the right words, if there can ever be such words, to offer some modicum of comfort to those who suffered such a tragic loss. This is a day that certainly our state and the people of Aurora will never forget. It has touched each and every one of our hearts, and you cannot help but condemn, obviously, the act. But each one of us, I think this day and for days, weeks, months, and years to come, will continue to offer up prayers for those who lost their lives, for the families that were affected, and our thanks for those who showed such love and concern, and for all the emergency service personnel who were there to defend people who just were out for a good evening. Mr. Speaker, I applaud this resolution and this Colorado delegation standing together today to be able to express this and thank this House for the support that they've shown as well for the people of Colorado. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 3 minutes to my friend from Denver, who had a number of constituents in the movie theater that evening, and so I'd like to yield 3 minutes to Diana DeGette from Denver.
Gentlelady is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my dear friend and colleague Ed Perlmutter for yielding to me. This is a difficult week for all of us from Colorado. There were 2 movie theaters in the Denver metro area that were showing this premiere at midnight last Thursday night. And so there were people from all over the community in that theater, there with their families and their friends, almost the entire employees of a restaurant in Colorado. They went to have a fun evening on a summer night. And tragedy, of course, struck that night, unexpectedly to everybody. I've been overwhelmed, as we all have in the delegation, by the support of the community for all of the victims of this shooting and their family. The way the communities have come together, Aurora and Denver and Englewood and all of the communities, has been a blessed thing to see for all of us. No one can make sense of a tragedy like this, and the stories of heroism are still coming out every day. The stories of miracles, babies born just a day or two after in the same hospital where the father lies in a coma. But yet, while we hear all of these stories of heroism, and while we hear all of the stories of first responders rushing to the scene and helping within even 90 seconds, at our heart we say, how can this happen and what can we do? I did have a number of constituents in that theater, some who were just injured, some who were in the nearby theaters who will be scarred psychologically forever by this, a close friend of my daughter's and others. I had at least 3 constituents who were killed by this terrible crime. The little girl, Veronica Mosier, age 6, whose mother Ashley lies in critical condition, Jessica Gawi and Alex Teves. And our prayers and thoughts go out to all of them and their families. It's wonderful to see my friends from the delegation here, the entire House delegation from Colorado, and we consider ourselves to be close allies, although we often disagree on different issues. I just want to say something to all of my colleagues and to everyone in this House, Mr. Speaker. We have now had, as of today, 25 moments of silence as respects victims of gun violence since the Columbine shooting. I was here for that, too. We had 2 moments of silence just the other day, one for Aurora and one for the anniversary of the Capitol police officer who was killed 10 years ago here today. So we can have our debates, we can have our discussions, we can mourn for the victims, which is appropriate this week. But it is our challenge as leaders of our state and leaders of our country to go on from today and to say, what can we seriously do as a nation to make sure that no tragedy of this scope or horror ever happens in this country again. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Doug Lamborn.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank Representative Mike Kaufman and Representative Ed Perlmutter for leading this time this morning. And Mr. Speaker, the fact that all of the entire delegation, bipartisan delegation, is here is just a small reflection of how the people of Colorado are coming together and the people of Aurora are coming together after this senseless tragedy. We've heard a lot of stories of bravery, both on the parts of the first responders and the parts of everyday citizens. But I want to tell a story of one of the victims. I'd like to share the story of Caleb Medley. Caleb is from the small town of Florence, just south of Colorado Springs. Today, Caleb lies in a medically induced coma after being shot in the face. In the days since that horrific shooting, his wife Katie has given birth to their first child, Hugo. Caleb spent his teen years in Florence, and after graduating from high school, he married his high school sweetheart, Katie. He went to work at a local grocery store. Like most people, he and Katie have big plans and dreams for their lives. From the time he was in the 8th grade, Caleb has wanted to be a stand-up comedian. Katie wants to work in veterinary medicine. The young couple moved to the Denver suburb of Aurora to pursue their dreams. On July 18th, just 2 days before the shooting, Caleb appeared at the Comedy Works and did well enough to advance to the next round. And he and his wife, Katie, were looking forward to their baby's birth a few days later. But before little Hugo could be born, Caleb and Katie made the fateful decision to go out one last night before becoming parents. According to a website that Caleb's family has posted, the two stood anxiously in line that night. They spent too much on popcorn and soda. They endured the movie trailers
and they watched the beginning of the movie. And that's when evil struck. Evil came to them through a man that opened fire in that movie theater. Katie and baby Hugo made it out uninjured, but Caleb was struck in the face by gunfire. Caleb has lost his right eye, has some brain damage, and doctors have put him in a medically induced coma. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask that the people of America would be praying for Caleb and his family. We are pulling for you, Caleb, and for all the victims of this senseless tragedy. I yield back.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
I thank my friend Doug for describing in detail one of these injuries. I'd like to introduce, Mr. Speaker, if I could, for the record, some brief biographical information of each of the victims who was killed. John Blunk, Alexander Jonathan A.J. Boyk, Jesse Childress, Gordon Cowden, Jessica Gowie, John Larimer, Matt McQuinn, Michaela Medic, Veronica Mosier, Alex Sullivan, Alex Teves, and Rebecca Wingo, because I want our record in this Congress to have their names and some information about them. And I appreciate you talking about somebody specifically. These are hard moments for all of us. These are good people, and some very bad things happen to some very good people. But I want to talk about some of the positive aspects that came out of this dreadful night. 13 years ago, Diana DeGette mentioned Columbine. And my district, on the southwest side of my district, I have Columbine. On the northeast side of my district, have this theater. And Colorado is a good place. I mean, all of us love where we come from. We've had some violent incidents that have taken our innocence, as Mr. Polis had said. We heal from these things, but you're never quite the same. You're never quite the same. But one of the positive aspects of that terrible incident 13 years ago at Columbine High School was that our law enforcement, our first responders, so our police, our firefighters, our medical teams learned some real lessons. And we have in the Aurora area a community college called Aurora Community College, where we have gone through a number of exercises to deal with a mass casualty incident such as this, where the police, the fire, law enforcement agencies from across our communities, Denver, Adams, Arapahoe counties, working together with the CU Medical School to address these kinds of incidents, you know. And as the Chief of Police, Dan Oates, who deserves a higher place in heaven for the way he has managed this terrible time on behalf of law enforcement, they prepared and prepared and prepared, and unbelievably this terrible tragedy happened. But because of that preparation, because of what we'd gone through before and the terrible lessons we'd learned, lives were saved. There's no question about it. Lives were saved that otherwise would have been lost. And I want to applaud, again, the Aurora Police, the Aurora firefighters, the medical teams. Casualties were taken to 6 or 7 different hospitals in our area, but they all did an outstanding job. The dispatchers, can you imagine all the 9/11 calls that came in that night? We want to thank them. We want to thank the FBI. Jim Yacone, who is our bureau chief, was outstanding on behalf of the federal response to deal both with the shootings that occurred in the theater and the elaborate booby trap that was set in this apartment that I drive by at least once a week. right across from the University of Colorado. This is something that we will heal from this, but we will never be the same. And I want to thank the Aurora schools who provided a place of safety for all of these individuals to go at the time of this incident. I want to thank the Ministerial Alliance. As Mr. Kaufman said, this is a community of great faith. And our churches and our synagogues have responded in a tremendous fashion to the sorrow that we all feel. There are many stories, some beautiful ones. The President shared one. And before I go further, Mr. Speaker, can I inquire as to the time of both sides? Because I know I have a couple other speakers that would like to.
The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, has 4.5 minutes.
Okay.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, has 4 minutes remaining.
Okay. I would just mention the story, and this is one that I am so proud of people from Colorado. There were 2 young women in the back of the theater when the gentleman came in and threw a tear gas canister across the theater. And the taller of the 2 noticed that it really was something other than a smoke bomb and a stunt, and she stood up to warn people, and she was shot in the neck immediately. And blood started to spurt out. Her smaller friend pulled her down, compressed that wound, and the older one said something, or the one who'd been shot said something like, "You need to leave. You need to get out of here." And her friend said, "I'm not leaving without you." And continued to press. The police responded very quickly, but it probably seemed like an eternity. But the young lady who was shot in the neck is on the mend and is going to recover fully, and her friend basically saved her life in the quick actions of the police and the fire department. So despite these terrible losses that we've suffered, and there are so many heartbreaking stories, there are some heartwarming stories as well. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time without objection. The biographical material referenced by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, shall be entered into the record. Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, rise in support of Mr. Perlmutter's comments in relationship to our own Aurora Police Department, as well as all the other law enforcement entities that have helped in this terrible tragedy. I now will yield as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Cory Gardner.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Gardner, is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
I thank the gentleman from Aurora for yielding time to share today, and to thank the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, for your leadership and your comfort and encouraging words during the incredible tragedy. And to the President, thank you for sharing your love with Colorado, as well as to Governor Hickenlooper for the leadership that he has provided throughout this past week. This chamber has seen its incredible days of victories, of celebrations, of great triumphs for this country. And today we discuss a resolution that talks about one of our nation's great tragedies. And so we join together as a delegation to talk about an event that we in Colorado know we will not let remain a tragedy, but will turn into remembrance of those who are good in our state and our country. We oftentimes in Colorado forget, because of the great beauty of our state, that sometimes the hearts of all people don't match that beauty. But as we sat at the prayer vigil this past Sunday and looked out as the rays of sun broke through the clouds on the choir, on the many people of faith who had gathered, we know that this one dark moment in history will be matched by far greater light. And it's our obligation to make sure that that indeed happens. As a father, I can't imagine the great loss of families, of friends the victims of this horrendous crime. And our hearts, our prayers, our thoughts go with them as we build a stronger community going forward. The many people of faith who have prayed, the people in this body who have shared their prayers and thoughts with the community of Colorado, remind me of a passage in the book of Matthew, where Jesus went out onto the lake in the middle of a storm with his disciples. And he looked out upon the stormy waters and he said, "Peace, be still." And we ask that those who are troubled, those whose hearts are yet to heal, we ask for the peace that we also desperately need. I yield back.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 1 minute to the leader, Ms. Pelosi.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank Mr. Perlmutter for yielding, and I'm very sad to join my colleagues in expressing the deepest sympathies of the House of Representatives to the families and loved ones of the victims in Aurora, Colorado, and to the entire community as it grapples with its grief. My colleague just spoke very movingly from the standpoint of faith, and hopefully that faith will be a comfort to those who are affected. As you know, Mr. Speaker, when we learned of this tragedy, the President ordered flags to be flown at half-staff for 1 week to commemorate the tragedy that Aurora, these individual families, and our country had suffered. That was done as a mark of respect for the 12 innocent victims of this senseless violence and for all who were affected. Of the victims who were murdered, and that's just the word, that day, the vast majority were very young people. The one, Gordon Cowden, was a father in his 50s. Well, that seems young to me. The others were very young, whose last words to his daughters were to tell them he loved them. Each of them has a story that deserves to be told. Each was beloved. Each left home with a different expectation of what would happen that evening, and so did the rest of the country. Several died protecting their loved ones, including John Blanc, Alex Tavis, and Matt McQuinn. Tevis. Alex Sullivan was about to celebrate his 1-year wedding anniversary. And that was the celebration, going there to the movies. A.J. Bionk had just graduated from high school. Jessica Gantwi dreamed of being a sports journalist. Michaela Medic and Rebecca Wingo were pursuing their futures at community college. 2 victims, Jesse Childress and John Larimer, were active duty military personnel. They signed up to risk their lives for our country, to protect our freedoms. Who could have ever thought that they would lose their lives going to the movies? And as a child, Veronica Moser will now forever be remembered as the 6-year-old. What a sad tragedy. Most of us here in this body are parents and grandparents, in Stenny's case, a grandparent, and every person knows the feeling of sending a child off to a movie with their friends, the excitement of an opening night, and then the worry when the minutes tick by and someone hasn't come home. It is with heavy hearts that we send our thoughts and prayers to the many grieving today, and we continue to pray. And thank you for taking us down that path. We continue to pray for the healing of those who survived both their physical pain and their emotional scars. That's probably the hardest. We send our gratitude to our first responders. Within minutes, when minutes counted, when seconds counted, they responded with bravery and with professionalism. In the words of this resolution, the Congress honors the resilience of the community, of the city of Aurora and the state of Colorado in the face of such adversity. May you feel the support, love, and prayers of our nation. May those tragically taken from us be honored and remembered. May time heal our grief. I hope it is a comfort to those who are affected by this tragedy, who lost loved ones or have injuries in their families, that so many people throughout the world mourn their loss and are praying for them at this sad time. I yield back the balance of the time, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. I thank Mr. Perlmutter.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on House Concurrent Resolution 134.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Mr. Speaker, I again inquire about the balance of time, and because I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, has 2½ minutes remaining. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Colorado who has been so involved and so eloquent in expressing the grief that his constituents share, and all the members from Colorado on either side of the aisle who have come together to share this grief. Mr. Speaker, when tragedy of this kind strikes, our hearts go out to those whose lives were cut short and those who lost loved ones. In the aftermath of this shooting, we have seen both an outpouring of love and support for victims and their families, and a quickness to point out what might have been done differently. That is our nature as Americans, always seeking answers, searching for corrective action, for a measure of logic in the irrational. But the first question we ought to ask, and is already being asked, how can we draw closer as a community? Not just the community of Aurora, but the community of Americans. As President Obama said on Friday, and I quote, "If there's anything to take away from this tragedy, it's the reminder that life is very fragile. And what matters at the end of the day is not the small things. Ultimately, it's how we choose to treat one another and how we love one another. I would add it is also how we commit to live with one another as neighbors. We may not share the same faith or politics or philosophy, but we do share a fundamental belief that our people should feel safe in our theaters, in malls and schools, in their homes, and on the streets, wherever they go. And today, we share the pain of the people of Aurora. But we also share in the hope that the city whose name is the Dawn will find in our sympathy and prayers the comfort it needs during the dark hour to begin the process of healing and to believe again in a brighter tomorrow. I yield back.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thank you. I'd just like to end, Mr. Speaker, by thanking my friends, and they are my friends and colleagues from Colorado. I just want to say that for all of us, Aurora and everybody who has been so affected by this senseless act, we're praying for you. We love you. And I just want to end. This act actually affected people from one coast to the other. A lot of people from all over the nation were in that. In fact, at the time, Mr. Speaker, from a nearby military base, there were 53 members of our military, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines were in that theater that night. This is something that touches us all, something that we will all remember, we will heal, and let's hope and pray something like this doesn't happen again. With that, I'd yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to the order of the House of Wednesday, July 25, 2012, the previous question is ordered. The question is adoption of the concurrent resolution.
Mr. Speaker, if I could, I also have another poem that I'd like to introduce as part of the record, if I could. And I'd ask unanimous consent.
Without objection. The question is on adoption of the concurrent resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The concurrent resolution is agreed to. The motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has passed H.R. 5872, cited as the Sequestration Transparency Act of 2012.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 741 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 152, House Resolution 741, resolved that during further consideration of the bill, H.R. 4078, to provide that no agency may take any significant regulatory action until the unemployment rate is equal to or less than 6.0%, as amended pursuant to House Resolution 783. The further amendment printed in Section 2 of this resolution shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. Section 2. The amendment referred to in the first section of this resolution is as follows. In Section 102B, strike employment and insert unemployment.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be amended by the amendment I have placed at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mrs. Fox of North Carolina. Strike all after the resolving clause and insert the following. That during further consideration of the bill, H.R. 4078, to provide that no agency may take any significant regulatory action until the unemployment rate is equal to or less than 6.0%, as amended pursuant to House Resolution 738. The further amendment printed in Section 2 of this resolution shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. Section 2, the amendment referred to in the first section of this resolution is as follows. In Section 102B, strike employment and insert unemployment.
Is there an objection?
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the right to object.
The gentleman is recognized on his objection.
Mr. Speaker, I think we should have an explanation here. The clerk read the technical language, but as I understand it, what happened was that the bill that we were voting on yesterday and we'll vote on today has an error and gets employment and unemployment confused. And this is a bill that would correct the error in the bill that we debated yesterday. So I wonder, why do we now need a unanimous consent? Are we correcting the correction? It's the old Latin phrase, quis custodiet ipsos custodes, who guards the guardians? I guess today the question is, who corrects the correctors? So I would ask, I would yield to the gentlewoman from North Carolina if she would explain why we had to get a bill to make a correction and now we have to have a unanimous consent apparently to correct the correction. What is the error? I guess I should say, what's the error of the day? We know what yesterday's error was. What's today's error? I'll yield to the gentlewoman.
Mr. Speaker, if I might respond to the gentleman from Massachusetts, and I appreciate his asking the question because it gives us an opportunity to do a mea culpa. That's my ability to quote Latin this morning in response to the gentleman from Massachusetts. Yes, there was a very minor error in the rule that was passed day before yesterday, and that was that two letters, the letters U, the letter N, were left off of one word And
If the gentlewoman, I would take back my time briefly to say, if that's the case, if the letters U and N were left out, knowing the animosity on that side to UN, I can understand why psychologically that would have happened. I yield again to the gentlewoman.
Then in preparing the correction for that, inadvertently 2 numbers were reversed.